This Russian nuclear physicist embraced Islam after testing the truth of the Qur'an through energy formulas. Imagine a man whose life is governed by logic. A scientist, not just any scientist, but a top graduate from the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, Russia's most prestigious university in the field of science. From a young age, his life was shaped by a system that rejected the existence of God, placed science above all else, and regarded religion as a myth of the past. He is Dr. Alexei Mikhailov, a nuclear physicist, senior researcher at a state experimental reactor research institute, and a staunch atheist. Alexei was not only knowledgeable in theory, he was a practitioner in the field. Every day, he dealt with invisible particles, calculated the energy released from minuscule masses, and studied how the laws of nature operate on microscopic and cosmic scales. For him, the world runs by definite laws that can be predicted and explained without the need for God. But who would have thought? Behind the energy formulas he had long believed to be absolute truth lay a clue leading to a light he never imagined. Not from a laboratory, nor from scientific journals or international symposiums, but from an ancient Arabic text which he had considered a religious text for the less rational, the Qur'an. Alexei never expected that an ancient book from the desert would shake the beliefs he had built over decades, especially when he discovered that the book did not only speak about worship and morals, but also touched upon realms considered exclusively scientific. The origin of the universe, the structure of matter, energy, even the dynamics of space and time. One verse that would awaken his cold logic came from Surah Az-Zariyat, verse 47. And the heaven we constructed with strength, and indeed we are its expander. Surah Az-Zariyat, verse 47. For ordinary people, this verse might sound merely poetic, but for Alexei, who understood well that the concept of an expanding universe was only recognized in modern science since the 20th century, this verse was like a spark igniting his conviction. How could, he wondered, a book revealed in the 7th century mention a concept only discovered through the Hubble telescope in the 20th century? But the great change did not come suddenly. It started from a small spark, from dialogue, curiosity, and the courage to open himself to the possibility that this world is not limited to numbers and formulas. The Quran itself states, "And we will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth." Surah Fussilat, verse 53.4. Alexei. These verses were not empty promises. He experienced them himself. He found those signs around him, in his research space, and even within himself. His story is not a fairy tale. It is the true story of a top Russian scientist who approached Islam not because of dogma, but because of facts. Not because of coercion, but because of discovery. From logic to light, from formulas to the Lord, from atoms to Allah. This is the remarkable journey of Dr. Alexei Mikhailov, a man who once challenged God with calculations, but ultimately prostrated in faith. Dr. Alexei Mikhailov was born in the city of St. Petersburg, Russia, in the winter of 1972. Snow covered the rooftops at that time, but life within his family was not as warm as the white snow. He grew up in a strongly atheist environment, a legacy of the Soviet Union's ideology that made the state the god and regarded religion as a relic of the past to be forgotten. His father was a military engineer working on secret state projects, while his mother was a disciplined mathematics teacher. There was no room for spirituality in their home. Every question about God or the meaning of life was answered coldly and logically. This world runs by the laws of nature, not by fairy tales from the sky. That was the phrase he heard repeatedly since childhood. Young Alexei was known as an introverted but extraordinarily gifted child. By the age of 10, he was already able to solve university-level calculus problems. In high school, he not only mastered theoretical physics but also began developing an interest in quantum mechanics, a field that made him feel as if he were touching the deepest secrets of the universe. He was never interested in religion. For him, religion was just an escape for weak people afraid of the unknown. Alexei said, "Science is everything to me. I believe in facts, in data, in logic. I believe in experiments, not revelation. God, I consider him an ancient idea from primitive humans afraid of thunder and volcanic eruptions. I want to explain the universe, not submit to it." In 1994, Alexei graduated from the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, MIPT, with summa cum laude honors, a rare achievement even among Russia's brilliant scientists. He became one of the best graduates in the history of the nuclear physics faculty. Immediately after graduation, he was recruited by the Russian Atomic Energy Agency, Rosatom, to join a secret research team studying the dynamics of experimental reactors. He worked on high-risk projects involving energy calculations, neutron stability, and atomic nucleus fission, work that only people with near-perfect mathematical precision could handle. In an underground laboratory protected by codes and barbed wire fences, Alexei felt like he was at the pinnacle of the world. He unraveled the laws of the universe, calculating the possibilities of destruction and creation on an atomic scale. The deeper he delved into nuclear physics, the further he felt from everything called God. Alexei said, "For me, life is a purely physical process. Consciousness is just the result of neuron interactions. Love, hope, faith, all are just chemical reactions. There is no soul, no heaven, no God." However, unknowingly, his very mechanistic worldview made him restless in silence. He began to realize that although he could calculate everything, there was one question he could never answer for sure. Why are the laws of the universe so orderly? Who wrote these equations from the beginning? But he chose to dismiss it. He preferred to drown in numbers and equations. E=mc² was not just a formula, it was his holy book. Energy and matter were the gods he could measure. In an internal interview kept for research documentation, he once said, "We don't need religion. We just need more experiments, more laboratories. The universe is a machine, and I am here to uncover how it works." But Allah, the Lord of the universe, had a greater plan for this servant who did not yet know him. Behind Alexei's hardened heart, there was a heart waiting for the right moment to be touched by light. And that light did not come from gamma particles or the uranium atomic nucleus, but from something far subtler and deeper. Allah says in the Qur'an, "Then your hearts became hardened after that, being like stones or even harder." Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 74. Indeed, those who were given knowledge before it, when it is recited to them, they fall upon their faces in prostration. Surah Al-Isra, verse 107. And in due time, these verses would come alive in the heart of a Russian nuclear physicist. But before that, he had to experience a meeting that changed everything, a small dialogue that led to eternity. In 2001, the world entered a new millennium. While humanity was busy welcoming the internet era and digital exploration, Alexei was increasingly immersed in the subatomic world. He was now a senior researcher at the Obninsk Nuclear Research Center, one of the secret facilities with access to advanced atomic splitting technology. But behind the fame and growing scientific authority he possessed, something began to change within him. Every night, he returned to his quiet apartment on the 12th floor, sat by the window, and gazed at the night sky with many questions through his telescope. He saw the orderly stars, the movement of planets that never missed a second, and orbits so precise. He began to ask himself, why is all this so orderly? If this is just the result of a random explosion, why is there no total chaos? But he dismissed the question again and again, until one winter night, when the temperature dropped to -15 degrees and the electricity went out in his area. Alexei lit a candle and stared blankly at the small flame. A thought suddenly emerged, a challenge. He whispered softly, almost mumbling. Alexei said, "If there is indeed a God, then prove it. Dare to show yourself. I am not afraid. I am a scientist. I do not believe in what cannot be proven." These were not just words. In his heart, he began to challenge the power he did not believe in. He felt that if God truly existed, he must submit to scientific methods. He must be measurable. He must be provable. He must be testable. In the following nights, he began doing something strange even by his own standards. He wrote a letter to God. Not a religious letter, but more like a scientific report addressed to the power he considered a myth. In one of his notes, he wrote, Alexei said, "God, if you exist, I challenge you to explain 5 things. The origin of the laws of physics, the cause of human consciousness, why I feel restless despite my established career, what the purpose of this life is, and why all of this feels empty. He carefully recorded each question and then stored it in a folder labeled Spiritual Experiment, Subject, God. He himself considered this a psychological experiment to prove that religion was a human creation and that no entity called God could answer these questions. However, what he did not expect was that from that moment on, his life slowly began to change. He started being haunted by strange dreams. In his sleep, he saw the sky collapse, stars extinguish, and himself standing alone in darkness. No numbers, no formulas, no laboratory, just emptiness in his dream. He heard a voice he did not recognize, but that was very profound. "Do you think that I do not hear you?" He woke up gasping for breath. Cold sweat soaked his body, yet he still refused to associate it with anything spiritual. He merely noted the event as a psychological anomaly caused by work fatigue. But his restlessness grew worse. He began reading spiritual literature, not because he wanted to find God, but because he wanted to refute him. He read the Bible, the Vedas, even the Tao Te Ching, intending to prove that all religions were the result of ancient human ignorance. But there was one book he had not touched, the Qur'an. For Alexei, Islam was an unfamiliar topic full of stereotypes. In Russian media, Islam was often portrayed as a religion of conflict and violence. But out of curiosity and scientific spirit, he finally decided to buy an English translation of the Qur'an and began reading it, with the intention of finding contradictions. Alexei said, "I opened the Qur'an not to seek the truth, but to find errors. I wanted to see how far this book could withstand scientific scrutiny. I was ready to tear it apart with logic and physics." But unlike what he expected, from the very first verse he read, his heart seemed drawn to something he had never felt before. "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful."
Sura al-Fatiha, verse 1.
This is the book about which there is no doubt, a guidance for those conscious of Allah. Surah al-Baqarah, verse 2. Those verses did not speak in a mystical style, but with the language of certainty and science. The Quran did not ask to be believed blindly, but challenged its readers to think, to reflect, to test. Allah says, "We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth." Surah Fussilat, verse 53. And without realizing it, his scientific challenge to God had now turned into the most honest search of his life. A search that would shake the foundation of his beliefs and lead his soul toward what he had long denied. The year 2002. The Particle Energy Center Laboratory in Obninsk was in the midst of developing a quantum gravity field experiment, a major project led directly by Alexei. That day, the room was filled with the sounds of atom-splitting machines, quantum computers glowing with colorful indicators, and digital screens displaying particle oscillation graphs. Alexei, in a white lab coat and with a serious face, sat in front of the main console. In his hands were measurement data that should not have existed. The particles they were monitoring, neutrons accelerated in a magnetic tube, disappeared for several microseconds, then reappeared in a state that could not be explained by standard physics laws. Alexei said, "What is this? Impossible. It's as if the particle disappeared into another dimension, then returned." At first, he thought it was a sensor error or electromagnetic interference. But after conducting 3 repeated tests with the same results, he began to realize that this was no coincidence. There was something violating space and time, something he could not control with Einstein's equations or Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. That night, he closed all his experiment files and sat alone again in his dimly lit small office. On the desk, the English translation of the Quran was still open to the page he had read the day before. For some reason, he was drawn to a verse he had previously overlooked. "And you have not been given of knowledge except a little." Surah Al-Isra, verse 85. Alexei read the verse over and over. For a scientist and skeptic like himself, those words felt like a direct blow to the heart. Just when he thought he understood the universe, the verse seemed to mock him. "Your knowledge is but a speck of dust in my ocean." He took a deep breath, then whispered. Alexei said, "Is it possible? This experiment is not just a scientific error? Is this the answer to my own challenge?" The next day, something even stranger happened. When he entered the experiment data cooling room, he found something that could not be explained logically. The main monitor screen displayed a blank graph, but at the bottom, a sentence appeared that he had never programmed. "You are searching, and I hear you." Alexei was stunned. No one in the lab had access to that part of the system except him. Even the password was a random quantum combination only he knew. He immediately unplugged the power cable and checked the system from scratch. No viruses, no traces of modification, no system errors. Only that sentence appearing briefly, then disappearing. Alexei said, "Who wrote that? How is it possible? Is this just an illusion?" He couldn't sleep that night. He opened the Qur'an again and tried to find out more. When he opened it at random, his eyes immediately fell on another verse. Say, "He it is who created you and made for you hearing and vision and hearts. Little are you grateful." Surah Al-Mulk, verse 23. Once again, the verse was not mystical. It was direct, rational, even philosophical. And what shook Alexei even more, the Quran seemed to know how he thought. The verses did not just command, but dialogued, answering, responding, and inviting discussion. At this point, he began to waver. For the first time in his life, an atheist physicist who had previously challenged God began to ask not with cynicism, but with a thirst for truth. Alexei said, "Is all this just scientific coincidence, or is there really something guiding me? Is this a sign? But from whom?" And for the first time as well, Alexei closed his eyes and tried to speak. Not to theory, not to journals, not to a screen, but to something unseen whose presence he was now beginning to feel. Alexei said, "If you truly exist, if you really are God, then guide me, but not with cheap miracles. Show me the truth with logic that cannot be refuted." That request was not answered by a voice from the sky, nor by a flash of light. But the next day, he received an invitation to attend an international physics conference in Dubai, a place that would become the beginning of a total transformation in his life. February 2003. The Dubai sky blazed bright. Modern buildings soared high amidst the desert, creating a harmony between the future and history. Dr. Alexei Mikhailov had just arrived in this city to attend the International Conference on Particle Physics and Cosmology held at the Dubai International Convention Center. He had never set foot in Arab lands before. For him, this was a foreign world. The culture, the language, even the way people dressed around him felt like another dimension. Yet behind it all, there was a curiosity within him that grew stronger each day, especially about one thing that continued to haunt him: the Quran. That afternoon, after the scientific presentation sessions ended, Alexei sat alone in a small garden near the Grand Mosque in the conference complex. From a distance, he saw an old man with a white beard reading something in a soft voice, a voice that was calm, melodious, and soothing. As Alexei slowly approached, he realized the sound was the recitation of the Quran. Alexei was silent. That voice somehow stirred his soul, not because he understood Arabic, but because the tone and rhythm seemed to touch a part of his heart he had never reached before. Alexei said, "What are you reading?" he asked quietly in English. The old man turned, smiled warmly, and replied, "That is the Quran, the word of God revealed to mankind." Alexei was silent for a moment, then said, "May I see it?" The old man handed him a small mushaf containing an English translation of the Quran. Hesitantly, Alexei opened it at random, and his eyes immediately fell on one verse. "Do they not look at the camels, how they are created, and at the sky how it is raised, and at the mountains how they are set up, and at the earth how it is spread out?" Surah Al-Ghashiyah, verses 17-20. That verse was not just a command to believe. It was an invitation to observe, to pay attention, and to reason. For a scientist like him, this was not a book of mythology, but like a high-level philosophy of science text, full of commands to think and reflect. Alexei looked at the old man and said, "This book, it seems it doesn't only speak to believers. It also speaks to thinkers, to us, the scientists." The old man nodded gently, then replied, "Because Islam does not hate knowledge. Islam is light, and light is never afraid of the truth." Alexei was stunned. Those words seemed to unlock something in his mind. He began to ask deeper questions. He told the old man about his strange experiment, the particles that disappeared and reappeared, the data that could not be explained by classical physics. And the old man listened patiently, then simply said, "When you try to understand creation, but you do not know the Creator, you will always feel that something is missing." That sentence echoed in Alexei's mind all night. He returned to his hotel, opened the translated Qur'an, and began reading from the beginning Surah Al-Fatiha. "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful." He read slowly, with a heart more open than ever before, and when he reached the verse, "Guide us to the straight path," Surah Al-Fatiha, verse 6, Alexei closed the Quran slowly. He did not cry, he did not smile. But in the silence of the night, for the first time, he felt a peace that did not come from numbers, graphs, or physics formulas, but from something invisible, something more real than any matter in this world. Alexei said, "God, if you truly exist, then here I am. I want to know you." And that night, it was not a dream or a flash of light that came, but a silent decision that he would continue this search, not as a cynical atheist, but as a humble human being. A scientist who now realized that perhaps truth is not only found in the laboratory, but also within his own heart. After a night full of inner turmoil in Dubai, Alexei's journey continued to a meeting he never expected to become the most important turning point in his life, an ancient mosque in the city center. Alexei met Imam Hassan, an Islamic scholar and philosopher known for his wisdom and openness to scientific dialogue. They sat facing each other in a simple room, illuminated by the warm light of an oil lamp. Alexei opened the conversation with a skeptical yet curious tone. Alexei said, "Imam Hassan, I am a scientist who seeks truth through formulas and experiments. But I ask, how can an ancient book like the Quran speak about energy, the universe, even the laws of physics that we have only discovered in recent decades? Isn't this more of a coincidence or metaphor?" Imam Hassan smiled gently. Imam Hassan said, "My brother, the Quran is the Kalamullah, the word of Allah that is not bound by space and time. It is not merely a historical text or poetry, but a revelation containing knowledge and wisdom that aligns with the progress of time." He quoted the verse that became the core of their dialogue. "Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of the night and the day are signs for those of understanding." Surah Ali Imran, verse 190. Imam Hassan continued, "Knowledge is part of obedience to the Creator. When you seek with a sincere intention, Allah will show His signs, both in the heavens and within yourself." Alexei nodded slowly, trying to digest those words. Yet his skepticism had not disappeared. Alexei said, "But what about the greatest question? Why does this universe exist? How can matter and energy come from nothing? In physics, we talk about singularities and the Big Bang, but who created all that?" Imam Hassan raised the Quran in his hand and recited softly, "He is the creator of the heavens and the earth. When he decrees a matter, he only says to it, 'Be,' and it is." Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 117. And Imam Hassan looked into Alexei's eyes and said, "This is the simplest and most noble explanation. Allah is the ever-existing, independent being, the source of all that exists. Meanwhile, science only explores how His creation works, not who created it." The debate lasted for hours. Alexei brought nuclear physics data, relativity theory, quantum mechanics, while Imam Hassan responded with wisdom, logic, and Quranic verses that challenged deeper reflection. Finally, Alexei admitted. Alexei said, "I am beginning to see that science and faith are not enemies, but two paths leading to one goal, the ultimate truth." Imam Hassan smiled and patted Alexei's shoulder. Imam Hassan said, "That's right, my brother. When you unite knowledge with faith, you gain a light that surpasses ordinary understanding. And that light is true guidance." That night, under the star-filled Dubai sky, Alexei looked up, feeling as if the universe itself was inviting him to believe. A new door opened, a door to the acknowledgement that there is a supreme power behind formulas and energy. The nights following the philosophical debate in Dubai filled Dr. Alexei Mikhailov's heart with a restlessness he had never felt before. His soul was torn between the science that had always been his foundation and the spiritual truth that was beginning to permeate his mind. Alexei began to note every verse he read, re-examining every formula he once understood only as abstract numbers. Now, every formula and verse seemed to form a symphony of harmony he had never heard before. Alexei said, "I have always believed that only what can be measured and proven empirically is true. However, when I read Surah Fussilat verse 53, we will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth. I felt that this verse was not just words, but a promise that applied to me personally. However, this inner turmoil also brought heavy doubt. The ego of a scientist, accustomed to controlling everything, refused to instantly let go of all his old beliefs. Every night, strange dreams and subtle voices came to him. Alexei said, "In my dream, there was a vast, silent white room, and a voice said, 'You have seen my evidence, so why do you still turn away?' I woke up with a pounding heart and trembling body. In the morning, he felt confused, torn between wanting to accept the light of that truth and holding on to the remaining skepticism. Alexei began contacting some of his colleagues, including Dr. Ahmed El-Zain, who became the starting point of his journey to understand the Qur'an. Alexei, while on the phone, "I can't pretend anymore, Ahmed. I'm not sure about God, but I'm sure the Qur'an is not a human fabrication. There is something in it that goes beyond the logic and science I have studied." Ahmed said, "Alexei, faith is a process. God does not wait for perfection, only an open heart. If you have come this far, then it is time to take the next step." In this inner struggle, Dr. Alexei began to feel an unusual calm, a peace that arose from surrendering his heart, even though his mind was still at war. Surah Al-Baqarah verse 2 strengthened his feelings. This is the book about which there is no doubt, a guidance for those conscious of Allah. Alexei slowly realized that science and faith do not have to be in conflict, but can complement each other to reveal the true essence of life and the holy month of Ramadan in 2013, amidst the blessed and peaceful atmosphere at the Islamic Center Manchester. Dr. Alexei Mikhailov stepped into a moment that would change his entire life, a moment when he not only bowed his head but also opened his heart and soul to the God he had long doubted. Alexei, once known as a staunch atheist and rational scientist, now stood before the Muslim congregation, ready to declare the Shahada, the declaration of faith that is the gateway to Islam. Alexei recited the Shahada. As the words passed his lips, it was as if the heavy burden that had suffocated his chest for decades was lifted. Tears flowed freely, wetting his cheeks, a sign of a soul now feeling the peace it had long sought in formulas and numbers. Surah Ar-Ra'd verse 28 stirred his heart at that moment. Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. Alexei said, "When I uttered it, I felt waves of calm and light filling every corner of my soul. My world, once full of doubt and darkness, transformed into a light guiding every step." The Shahada was not just a verbal confession but also a sacrifice of ego and pride. For him, it was a victory of science that did not close the door to spirituality but embraced it. After the Shahada ceremony, Alexei felt reborn, with a new perspective that combined logic and faith in perfect harmony. Surah Al-Hujurat verse 13 became an eternal reminder for him. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Now, Dr. Alexei Mikhailov was no longer just a skeptical scientist but a Muslim who brought the light of faith into every research and study. His long journey of testing the truth of the Quran through energy formulas had led him to ultimate truth.